People are coming up to me almost every day saying, what can I do? There is a sense of fear and almost panic that we're in the process of losing our country. And I don't mean it from a partisan standpoint, I mean from a we believe in the United States of America standpoint.
What are you seeing with this in terms of this coming rising grassroots?
This can't be a top-down approach. It needs to be neighbors talking to neighbors. Everything in politics is a neighbor talking to a neighbor on a front porch. Even if that front porch is on social media or a phone call or sitting next to them at a kid's basketball game, it's always that conversation between two neighbors. And how do you affect that conversation? Because that's where minds are actually changed.
Hey, welcome back everyone. The United States has gone through some major political shifts. Both the Republican Party and the Democrat Party are going through internal battles over the future of their parties and what they really stand for. And here to talk with us more about this is Andrew Boucher. He's partner at RightVoter, and he's also one of the organizers of the Charleston meeting and of the Monday meeting in New York. Andrew, real pleasure having you on Crossroads.
Nice to be with you.
So we've seen this shift in parties, right? Back, we look at the Democrats pre-Trump, they were more of the blue-collar Democrats, seen as they become now more of the far left and the establishment. Even the Bush-era Republicans went to them. And the question is now, what does the Republican Party represent post-Trump, now that Trump is playing the grassroots role? Are they the MAGA party? Are they the Trump party? Are they the conservative party? Are they the Republican Party? What are they?
The answer is yes. They're all of the above. And I think obviously President Trump has left his mark on the Republican Party, and that's a mark that's going to last for a generation. And frankly, he brought some great things to the Republican Party. And there's a lot we can learn from the MAGA revolution and what he was able to bring to the coalition in 2015, 2016, and beyond, and is still doing it. For the first time, we had somebody who was speaking to the blue-collar Democrats who many Republicans prior had left behind and had been talking past. And the other thing he did, which I think was revolutionary, was he really refused to accept the premise of the question, no matter who the questioner was. If he thought it was unfair, he was ready to punch back and fight back. And I think Republicans in the Republican base gravitated to that energy and gravitated to that feistiness, and still do to this day. So those two attributes I think we're going to see in a lot of Republican candidates moving forward, which is we have a bigger coalition now, it's more diverse, it includes a lot of people who used to be Democrats, union members, blue-collar workers, and we're not going to sit back and let the press in Washington, D.C. decide what the rules of debate are. If something's unfair and if the premise is unfair, we're going to see a whole bunch of candidates for every level of office really start fighting back against the premise of the question.
Now, there's been talk, it's media framing, of course, but talking about this civil war within the Republican Party, because Trump, it's the buzzword, right?
Yeah.
Because Trump has started up his own pack, and he's going head-to-head now with the RNC and others, basically trying to say, donate to my pack, not to theirs, and he's looking to put his own candidates into place. Now, well, I think we have seen similar things happening on the Democrat side, which I want to talk to you about as well, but first let's start with the Republican side. How does this play out? How does the Republican Party not split? How do they deal with the Trump side trying to get out what he calls the rhinos? How do they deal with this?
Well, I think the most important thing is when President Trump a few weeks ago declared unequivocally that all of the talk about a third party and starting his own party, he wasn't going to go that route, and that was important. I'm of the opinion that when you have conflict and you have an exchange of ideas and you have feisty primaries where people are putting it all out on the line to try to win the nomination of a party, that's a good thing. We should be having these fights. We should be trying to figure out who's the best person to nominate and elect from each congressional district, each Senate seat. And it's a hallmark of a dynamic, growing party when you start having conversations between, if you have an establishment wing or so-called establishment wing and a MAGA wing and a constitutional conservative wing and a small government wing and you can extend it to foreign policy. You have more interventionists versus isolationists or America firsters. Those are all all valid voices within the Republican coalition. So the media likes to focus on the conflict. Sometimes the conflict is good and healthy.
This is interesting. Now, another big image that stood out in a lot of Republican voters' minds, and I'd say I'm using Republican lightly because I think a lot are just generally conservatives who vote Republican sometimes. I saw a lot of images online, people getting donation letters from the RNC and others and writing insults and sending it back.
Yeah.
And I think this is because they saw a lot of Republicans act against Trump in the last days, and they felt that this was like betraying the president. You also saw the Bush-type Republicans side with the Obamas and so on, getting behind Biden. And so you saw the public perception of the shift of the more institution-type Republicans moving away from Trump, and a lot of people took that as them turning against what the party stands for. How do you reconcile this? How do they reconcile this?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of use for somebody who thought so little of President Trump that they decided they were going to support Joe Biden for president or support Democrats for office. You have consultants and so-called party leaders who went against Susan Collins in Maine. Well, look, when you support somebody like Joe Biden for president, you get hard left Democrat policies that are going to bankrupt the country. We have a $1.9 trillion bill that just went through that was full of bailouts for unions, municipalities that have screwed up their own finances over the years, and giveaways to left-wing pet projects. And we got that because a lot of those so-called moderates decided there was nothing worse, there could be nothing worse than President Trump. Well, I'll tell you what, no matter what you thought of President Trump, if you were supporting the hard left policies of Joe Biden, this is what you get. You get the executive orders, you get a foreign policy that right now is a mess, and you get this overspending and this financial mismanagement, and you get this rise of the hard left within the Democrat Party, which is pushing policies that are frankly go against 200 plus years of American constitutional government.
And this is the other side of the picture, is people talk about the civil, media summit, civil war in the Republican Party. You have the same thing on the Democrat side, where they're grappling with a very extreme far left that is a minority, but a very vocal minority. And that very vocal minority is they're really the ones pushing the grassroots. And so they're kind of dragged along with these very far left policies right now. I guess one, how do they grapple with that going forward? How does it relate to conservatives and what they represent going forward? And number two, how do you think this impacts, say, their ability to get to middle America voters?
Well, look, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer right now are deathly afraid of the hard left within the Democrat Party. The loudest voices and the most powerful voices in the Democrat Party are the shrillest voices, the ones who are pushing the most extreme leftist policies. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are kowtowing to that, and President Biden, as of right now, is signing whatever they put in front of him. He doesn't seem to be a part of the negotiations at all on this important legislation. When it comes to how that plays out electorally, the Democrats are being pulled to the left. They can't control it. And those voices within their coalition that are calling for defunding the police, public funding of congressional races, nationalizing of elections, these bailouts to special interests on the Democrats' special interests, those voices fundamentally don't play well in middle America. We've seen the polling, how much the defund the police movement really hurt Democrats. It was one of the reasons why Republicans were able to gain seats in the House this past cycle, even though they were projected to lose seats. So we know that those messages don't work in middle America, and frankly, the more oxygen the left is forced to give to the shrillest messengers, the more it will benefit Republicans. Because when we see the true face of the left, the average swing voter doesn't like what they see.
And we're seeing two sides of that as well. You're seeing the very radical policy and the very extreme statements, and then you're seeing the mainstream media trying to tone that down as kind of the filter for the American people. You're seeing them trying to cover for that a little bit.
Right.
But the question is, how receptive are people actually to those messages, and what do they think of the attempts to downplay it versus the very extreme statements actually being made publicly?
Yeah, what we've seen within the mainstream media over the past year is such a gaslighting campaign to completely tell Americans that what they're seeing before their own eyes isn't so. We saw it all last summer with the riots that were gripping city after city in America, and the press coming out and saying these are mostly peaceful protests. When you
standing in front of burning buildings.
Standing in front of burning buildings saying this is a mostly peaceful protest. Hundreds of riots around the country, and some that are still going on in places like Portland. And we were told all last year by the mainstream media that this was no big deal. This wasn't even happening. The American people have started to see through that. And the press, as a conservative, I've always seen the press as inherently biased against conservative opinions and conservative leaders. This is the first time I've ever seen the press openly brag about their bias and pat themselves on the back for being biased, and frankly, try to run people out of their industry who aren't biased enough. The American people understand the bias of the press in a way that they haven't in my 25 years of doing this professionally. I've never seen the people so aware of the bias coming from the mainstream media.
And this brings up an important point, which is this concern of overreach, that they're overdoing it, that they're flailing, that they're not targeted, they're not focused. What do you see happening with this right now?
I think the left is going through, I don't think they were prepared to govern. And this happens a lot. I think they were surprised when they picked up the 2 Senate seats in Georgia. And all of a sudden, instead of being able to send things from the House into the Senate, have it die in the Senate because Republicans had a majority in the Senate, and be able to protect Joe Biden from crazy legislation coming out of Nancy Pelosi's House, now it's going to the Senate and they've got to fight it out. And Chuck Schumer now is being handed things like H.R. 1, which is a nationalization of the elections, and gives out handouts to congressional candidates with taxpayer money. That type of crazy legislation is making it to the Senate, and we have to debate it in the Senate, and Chuck Schumer's trying to pass it in the Senate, and some of that might make it to Joe Biden's desk. It's very tough to govern, especially when you weren't planning to govern. And I don't think they were prepared to do so.
And the other side of it is cancel culture, that they're attacking everyone. Now you see even the trans community and the feminist community kind of going at it. And they canceled recently Speedy Gonzalez, voiced by a Mexican American, I believe. You had the canceling of Pepe Le Pew. You had the canceling of Dr. Seuss, who ironically had kind of communist-ish viewpoints anyways. In other words, they're going after some of their own, maybe not Pepe Le Pew, but the other ones. They're going after some of their own within their own narratives now. And they're attacking really conservatives as being insurrectionists and so on. A lot of people are actually really concerned about this. Yeah. With the gun control programs, they're talking about seizing firearms. I think everybody feels that they're under attack in some way. The question is, how broadly can they do that while still actually having an impact of moving people along with their narratives?
Well, I think they're overplaying their hand right now. It's one thing if it's somebody from afar, right? If that guy over there is getting canceled, but when you drill down and you're starting to talk about Dr. Seuss, books that people have on bookshelves and have since their kids were very little, then all of a sudden it starts to hit home. And we might live in this hyper-political ecosystem of paying attention to Twitter and reading the news every day, but most voters don't. Well, this is starting to permeate the consciousness of the average apolitical voter. And what they're asking themselves right now is, what have I done or what might I do that could get me canceled? That could get me branded as a racist or sexist or transphobe? That could get me fired? Or what might my kids be doing? That's what's scariest. If you have kids who are in their early teen years or their teenage years, and you're seeing the stories about kids getting their college admissions rescinded because of a text message they sent a few years ago to friends, you start to ask yourself, boy, my kids need to watch what they say, even at the ages of 12, 13, 14 years old. So when the question goes from who was canceled next, who was just canceled, to could I be the next person canceled? And I think that's where we are, because this is so mainstream. I think that's when it falls apart for the left, and I think we are reaching that tipping point very rapidly, where the cancel culture will have no teeth because the people will rise up against it and say no more.
And that brings up one of the big things we're seeing right now, which is this new grassroots movement on the conservative side. Trump has started up his office of the former president. He's talking about community organizing, grassroots organizing, things that Republicans typically don't get involved with. And I can tell you at CPAC, talking to people, a lot of people are talking about grassroots organizing. And I know you have a pretty good sounding board for this with the Charleston meeting and with the Monday meeting in New York. What are you seeing with this in terms of this rising grassroots?
People are coming up to me almost every day saying, what can I do? Well, which candidates do you like? Who would you like to vote? No. How can I help reach out to people in my community? There is a sense of fear and almost panic that we're in the process of losing our country. And I don't mean it from a partisan standpoint. I mean from a we believe in the United States of America standpoint. And what can we do to save the United States of America? And frankly, the focus is correct. I mean, the focus from the president's team to really start to organize at the community level is where it needs to happen, because this can't be a top-down approach. It needs to be neighbors talking to neighbors. Everything in politics is a neighbor talking to a neighbor on a front porch. Even if that front porch is on social media or a phone call or sitting next to them at a kid's basketball game, it's always that conversation between two neighbors. And how do you affect that conversation? Because that's where minds are actually changed. They're not changed by TV ads, they're changed by the conversations. And the conservative movement needs to get back out, needs to stop talking to each other, start talking to some of these swing suburban voters that we've lost along the way, and say, come back into the conservative camp, come back into the Republican coalition, because you look at what's happening on the other side. The cancel culture, the overspending, the absolute insanity that's coming from the hard left, the attacks on the United States of America itself, that's not what you want to be a part of. You want to be a part of our larger coalition that believes in the United States, that believes in limited constitutional governance.
One of the most common comments I see among the more serious concerns from featured people who watch my channel, they often comment on why bother voting? Why should I bother voting? Because they see H.R. 1 getting pushed through. They saw that the lawsuits of, go to the Supreme Court of Trump, Linwood, and Sidney Powell got thrown out without any reason given by the Supreme Court. And they don't believe in the election system anymore. What would you tell these people?
I would say, look, we have had some setbacks. The left is looking for every way possible to undermine the integrity of our elections. But Republicans have worked hard to make sure that we have voter ID laws in place. The left is trying to undermine that. But I'll tell you, it is disheartening at times. But we picked up seats in 2020 in the House. We have a great chance to win back the Senate. We have a chance to win back the presidency in 2024. And more importantly, look down at the local level. Look at state representative, state senator, city council, town council, mayor. These are the races where people affect the most change. And frankly, they're the most important for long-term change, is to get involved in off-year elections, the 2021 elections, depending on where you live. If there's municipal races happening, the 2022 midterm elections, where Republicans should be able to take back the House of Representatives and make a major statement that the Biden agenda and the hard left agenda is not the right agenda for America, and then 2024 and beyond. So I know it's disheartening to see some of the fraud that's happened and the undermining of the integrity of the elections, but remember that we're the majority in this country. And the majority of Americans believe in the United States of America. They're proud to be Americans. They believe in limited constitutional governance. They believe in the values that have made America great. And because of that, we're going to win elections in the future as long as we don't give up hope, and as long as we keep on working, as long as we keep on talking to our neighbors.
Another big piece of this is the whole spirit of the party. We were talking earlier about Trump and the RNC. The other thing is, we had the Tea Party movement, which actually really, it went away, but the spirit of it really stayed in place. And a lot of the key people with that got involved really deeply within the Republicans. A lot of people actually would say that Trump was almost a Tea Party president. and that those ideas have really steeped into the Republican movement. How do you see those ideas, this more constitutional type Republican, affecting things?
Well, the constitutional conservative movement, which really was this 2009-2010 phenomenon, and was something of a backlash against the George W. Bush approach of what he called whatever it was conservative with a heart, and it was compassionate conservative, which I think is a redundancy, but he had to add compassionate conservative to it. But the Tea Party movement, what was brilliant about the Tea Party movement was it was organic. These Tea Party events in April of 2009 sprung up organically. Now, people glommed onto them later on and became different organizations that proclaimed themselves the Tea Party groups, and some of those organizations are fantastic and do great work. But the original Tea Parties, there was one here in Charleston, they were all over the country, and these were completely organic, volunteer-driven. I heard that there might be a protest happening in a different city, let's do one here in April of 2009. That type of energy, we're about to see a revival of that type of energy. Because the Tea Parties came about when Republicans were on the ropes, and we had lost the White House. We were down to 40 seats in the Senate. Now we're at 50. We were at 40 in 2009. We had lost the House. And we said, what can we do? How can we organize? How can we get together with our neighbors, make our voices heard, go through a nominating process where we took, people, it was an anti-establishment movement. There were a lot of establishment hand-picked nominees that lost primaries in 2010. I think that'll happen again. And take back the party and nominate and win elections in 2010. And 2010 was a historic year for Republicans, winning back the House and really almost winning back the Senate. So I'm optimistic for 2022, and I'm optimistic because you're feeling that same type of what can we do energy. How can we take our country back? How can we help elect good people to office?
And I guess also, again, you have a pretty good sounding board of where the conservative movement is, again, through the Monday meeting and the Charleston meeting. How have you seen the culture change in the conservative movement / Republican Party post 2020?
Well, I think everything in politics goes in cycles, and you're either high or you're low. And if you're too high and too full of yourselves and too confident, you get sloppy, you make mistakes, you get complacent. And I think maybe there was a lot of overconfidence going into the 2020 cycle. I don't know if we believed, especially before the COVID lockdowns hit, when we thought President Trump was going to cruise to re-election. We're sitting with the best economy of a generation. He brought peace to the Middle East. And then the COVID crisis hit and the lockdowns hit, and I don't think Republicans saw things happening until it was a little bit too late. Now we're down low. And frankly, if the advice when people are up high is don't get overconfident, at this point it's don't lose hope. Great things happened in November of 2020. We might have lost the White House, but we picked up seats in the House. Right? We proved that even in a tremendous headwind of COVID, riots, and the media lying about both, that we were able to pick up seats in the House and turn out 75 million voters for President Trump. So don't lose hope, don't lose faith in the process. Get back to work, start talking to your neighbors, and get out there.
Just a last question. The one big difference too, you talked about the similar changes happening after Obama was elected leading up to 2010. One of the big factors that's different now is that Republicans have this whole Trump movement. And Trump is, I've been kind of half joking that he's kind of like the Soros of the Republicans now. He's talking about community organizing, grassroots. He has influence at the top political level, and he's trying to place his own candidates at the middle level. Between the top, middle, and low, and when it comes to grassroots, that dynamic is not something Republicans have ever had before. How do you see this affecting things going forward?
Well, Trump has tremendous power within the Republican Party because he earned it, right? He won a primary in 2015 and 2016 that nobody gave him any hope of winning. He redefined what the Republican coalition is and took that to a place of governance where he achieved great things in 4 years in office. How that plays out in the future, we're going to have some growing pains. I think you're going to see voices rise up and say, I want to take it in a different direction. I think there's going to be shots fired in all different directions. We're going to see some of this play out in actual primary campaigns around the country. But what I tell people is there is no anti-Trump lane within any Republican primary anywhere in America. There is not going to be a single person who wins a Republican primary in 2022 who runs on the basis of, I think we should move past Donald Trump. I don't think Donald Trump did a good job as president. You can't be an anti-Trump Republican and win a primary in this party anywhere in America. So once we've established that, that makes a lot more sense for how we're starting to reorganize the party, reorganize the grassroots, whose voices are going to be enhanced, and frankly, whose voices we're probably not going to hear from again.
Hey, Andrew Boucher, real pleasure having you on Crossroads.
Thanks for having me.